Well, as we just heard there with Mark Stone, no intention of invading. What do you see the main concerns are? We also heard Mark saying that the tensions are certainly very high.
You saw this with the bilateral talks that began this week, that one of the big issues that's happening right now is that there really isn't something to resolve at this point. The U.S. has declared that invading Ukraine is obviously a non-starter. Putin wants NATO to pull back. That's something that's also not going to happen. So I think both sides may be looking for a way to save face here, but we haven't gotten to the point at which that's happened. Now, to some extent, the talks happening at this point are a victory for Putin in and of themselves. Some people I've talked to, particularly veterans of the foreign policy establishment here in America, have noted that these talks are maybe more a representative of the ones that happened during the Cold War than any others that had happened between the United States and Russia since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what Putin is doing here, I think, is really trying to recreate Russia's old sphere of influence from the days of the USSR. How far that goes, I think, has yet to be seen. But there's deep concern within the U.S. Foreign policy establishment in particular about what happens next.
What do you think the likelihood, Alex, is of the relationship being repaired?
I think almost every president has come into office since really since Bill Clinton and said that we want to have a good, strong relationship with Russia, and that has not. It's not happened yet. I think that it may be beyond breaking point. I think certainly the 2016 election itself makes it very difficult for Democrats in particular to come together with Vladimir Putin, who will be in power for quite a long time to come, it seems like. So one of the biggest issues here is the complete lack of trust. There's a complete unwillingness, I think, on either side to take seriously or trust the statements being made by the other side. So even in moments like this, where there's, I think, maximum tension and perhaps desire to scale some of that back, it's really, really difficult to find an off ramp.
President Biden, let's talk about the voting rights. What do you think he wants to achieve, and what are the problems with the voting rights?
The biggest problem that they have is that there isn't a way forward. The bills themselves, the way the Senate works, you need 60 votes to break a filibuster. Democrats do not have 60 votes on any of these bills. There are only 50 Democrats in the Senate. No Republican is going to vote for any of these bills. So their other option would be to reform the filibuster, the 60-vote requirement. They don't have 50 votes to do that because there are at least 2 Democrats within their caucus that don't want to do that. So he's stuck between a rock and a hard place here. I think there's a deep desire. It's possibly the most important issue to Democratic voters. There have been hundreds of bills, both proposed and passed by Republican state legislatures across the country, not only limiting access to voting for Democrat-leaning groups, but also in some cases giving Republicans enormous control over the election apparatus, and in some cases even the ability to possibly overturn elections at the state level. I think there's a need both for safeguarding democracy, but I think also in a crasser way, just politically, for Biden to move forward on something here. But right now they just don't. They don't have the votes to do it, and I don't think they have a political path forward. They've tried. Biden gave a very, very fiery speech this week, possibly his kind of angriest call to action yet. And I think that was really a reflection of how little power he has on this issue. That Democrats want to move, but they have nowhere to go.
Yeah, the Dems and the Republicans both in agreement on democracy and the electoral system, perhaps not agreeing on what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, is that there's sort of limited room to compromise here. There's been some talk of kind of trading national voter ID for various ballot, maybe access to the ballot at the state level, but Republicans are not interested in sort of giving the federal government control over elections, which are run by the states. And in general, I think are content with the system as it is now, in which the states in which they control are limiting, access. They're also using gerrymandering to make it harder for Democrats to adequately represent the number of Democrats that are in the state. So, it's another issue, yet another issue in American politics, in which even though I think both sides both sides acknowledge that there needs to be some sort of electoral reform, there's no common ground on what that actually looks like, and therefore there's no movement on the national level.
All right, we've got about 1 minute. We have to talk about COVID. A world record tally this week. The US reporting 1.3 million new coronavirus infections just in one day. That was on Monday. The American Red Cross has declared a national blood crisis with the worst blood shortage in over 10 years. The court passed a requirement for healthcare workers to be vaxxed. and the Supreme Court has blocked it. There's just so much going on. What are the main issues that you're seeing?
But one of the biggest issues that the Supreme Court ruled yesterday, that Biden's employer mandate on vaccines was unconstitutional. So that really takes one of the most important arrows out of the administration's quiver to get people vaccinated. We've seen that those mandates have had an enormous effect in raising the vaccination rate, which we have 75%, I think, of adults have one dose or more at this point. But as we've seen with Omicron here in the U.S., Omicron, which I got last month, and many other people have right now, these new variants, I think, are really affecting the United States more than other places because our vaccination rate is so low. Hospitals right now are being overwhelmed, and without adequate vaccination, and again also without an adequate rise in testing as well, which the administration has I think really lagged behind on. There's I think some concern about how the U.S. is going to respond to this. We might be at the Omicron peak right now, but I think talking to public health officials, one of the concerns is that the way down from that peak in the United States in particular is going to be really bad because of the low vaccination rate.
Yeah, and I'd love to get your opinion as well. Of course, big news here in Australia with our immigration minister last night cancelling Novak Djokovic's visa, more court hearings over the weekend. What is your opinion and what's the reaction in the US?
Well, the reaction, I think, in the U.S., like so many other things, falls on kind of partisan lines here, that particularly how people respond to the vaccine. But that's become so heavily politicized, even though, again, the vaccination rate has crept above 70% for the most part. Republicans are much more anti-vaccine, and therefore somebody like Novak Djokovic, his stance, I think, has been more widely accepted, whereas on the left, he's being lambasted. I do think, we always appreciate other international political crises like this to make ours, at least put ours into perspective. So.